The sound of my fishing rod snapping in half echoed through the quiet air, just as the police car pulled up, sirens blaring in the distance. My heart raced as I turned, seeing Karen standing across the street with a smug grin, her eyes locked onto me like a predator eyeing its prey. She had called the cops on me for fishing on my own property, but this was only the beginning. What happened next would change everything, because this wasn't just a fight over a lake. It was a battle for control over everything I held dear. Welcome back to Confessions of HOA. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe. I had lived in the same quiet neighborhood for years, tucked away in a small suburban town where the biggest drama usually revolved around someone's dog barking a bit too loudly or a lawn that hadn't been mowed. My house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, and behind it, stretching out like a shimmering mirror, was the lake. It wasn't just any body of water, it was my lake. My family had owned the property for generations, and that lake had always been a part of it. I'd spent countless mornings fishing, the water perfectly still as I cast my line out into the calm, reflecting sky. It was my escape, my peace. No one ever bothered me. Until her. Karen, the HOA president, had always been a bit, well, overbearing. She had a way of making herself the center of attention at every neighborhood event, and when she wasn't organizing some important meeting or rallying the neighbors to fix something that wasn't even broken, she was stirring the pot. I'd always kept my distance, partly because I didn't want to get sucked into the petty drama that seemed to follow her wherever she went, and partly because it was obvious that she had a knack for controlling people. So, it came as a surprise, an unwelcome one, when she showed up one afternoon as I was casting my line into the lake. She was standing at the edge of the water with her arms crossed, wearing that smug, self-righteous expression that I'd grown used to. "Excuse me," she said, walking toward me with her heavy steps crunching the leaves beneath her. "I need to talk to you about something." I paused, my fishing rod in midair, confusion flooding my chest. "What's going on?" She looked at the water behind me, then back at me, eyes narrowed. "You can't fish here," she declared. I chuckled, thinking she was joking. "I'm sorry. This is my property. I've fished here for years." Her eyes hardened. "No, it's not just yours. The HOA has new rules. This is a private lake, and you don't have the right to fish here anymore." She didn't offer an explanation, just an ultimatum. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt my stomach drop. Something was off. This wasn't just about fishing. This was about control. And as I watched her walk away, I realized that this wasn't going to end with just a few words. Little did I know, this would be the start of something far bigger than I had ever anticipated. The battle for my right to enjoy a simple day by the lake was just beginning, and it was about to spiral completely out of control. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I wasn't expecting anyone, so my mind immediately jumped to the worst possible scenario. Maybe Karen had come to finally settle her so-called fishing dispute. I opened the door, and there she was, standing on my doorstep with that clipboard she always carried around, a smile plastered on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good afternoon," Karen said, her voice all sweetness, though I could hear the underlying tone of superiority. "I thought we could talk about the fishing situation." I raised an eyebrow, not in the mood for more of her games. "What's there to talk about? You already made your point. This is my property, Karen." She chuckled, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Well, that's the thing. The HOA has new rules. And fishing here? Not allowed anymore." She flipped open her clipboard, the paper rustling loudly between us. "You see, we've had complaints. And unfortunately, there are some things we need to take care of for the safety of the community." I didn't buy it for a second. "Complaints? From who?" She glanced down at her clipboard again, pretending to check some imaginary list. "We're not disclosing personal information, but you know, it's for the best. The HOA has to protect the neighborhood's image, after all." Her eyes flicked over my yard, over the lake, like she was evaluating every inch of it. "And well, some of your activities might be disturbing to the neighbors." Her words hit harder than I expected, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of frustration. "Fishing is disturbing? Really?" She smiled again, that same cold, professional smile. "You know, your lawn could use some attention, too. Might want to tidy up a bit. It gives the neighborhood a more well-kept look." Her eyes traveled over the overgrown patch of grass by the fence, her judgment sharp. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was attacking my property, my peaceful life, all because of something as ridiculous as fishing. I didn't know how far she was willing to push this, but I had a sinking feeling this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't just trying to control what I did by the lake. She was trying to control my whole life. What I didn't realize yet was that this was only the first volley in a war that was about to consume everything. And Karen wasn't going to stop until she had complete power over every inch of this neighborhood. The morning was quiet, the air still and crisp as I cast my line into the lake. The soft ripple of water was the only sound, a perfect escape from the tension that had started to cloud my life. For the first time in days, I felt at peace. The chaos of the past week seemed a distant memory as I settled into my routine, but little did I know, it was about to come crashing back. I hadn't been fishing for more than an hour when the distant sound of sirens pierced the air. My gut tightened, and I turned to see a police car pulling up by the edge of my yard. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake, maybe some random traffic issue nearby. But as the car came to a stop, the officer stepped out, and my stomach sank. The officer didn't seem surprised to see me. He looked at me, then at the lake, then back at me, his expression unreadable. "Are you the homeowner here?" he asked. I nodded slowly, my confusion growing. "Yeah, what's going on? Is there a problem?" The officer hesitated, glancing down at a clipboard, his eyes skimming over some notes. "We've had a report of trespassing on this property. The HOA has made a formal complaint. You're not allowed to fish here." My blood ran cold. "What? This is my land. I've lived here for years. Why is the HOA calling the cops on me?" The officer just shrugged, a look of indifference in his eyes. "I'm just following the report. You'll have to stop fishing. The HOA has its reasons." I looked past him, my eyes catching Karen's smug face peering from across the street, her arms folded, watching the scene unfold with a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. She'd called the cops. She'd made sure everyone saw me being dragged into some ridiculous confrontation. As the officer spoke, my neighbors started to gather, their curious stares making me feel like an animal in a zoo. Word was spreading fast, and I could hear whispers among them. Is he really trespassing? On his own property? The humiliation burned in my chest. I tried to stand my ground, but the officer's presence, combined with the smirks from my neighbors, made it impossible to fight back. All I wanted was to be left alone, to fish in peace on my own land. But Karen's petty war was just beginning, and it was clear she wasn't going to let it go so easily. Little did I know, this humiliating moment would be the spark that ignited a much bigger fight, one that would put everything I valued on the line. And Karen was only just getting started. I arrived at the HOA meeting that evening feeling a mix of nerves and frustration. I'd hoped this would be the moment I could set things right, that maybe, just maybe, Karen would back off, and we could put this whole ridiculous ordeal behind us. But as soon as I walked into the room, I felt the tension in the air. The walls seemed to close in, and I could see it in the faces of the other residents. Many of them looked uneasy, whispering among themselves. Karen, however, stood at the front, looking more confident than ever. She flashed me a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her voice oozing with fake politeness as she welcomed everyone to the meeting. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, as if she hadn't been the one to cause all this chaos. "We have a few important matters to discuss, starting with the recent issue concerning the lake." My heart sank as the eyes of the room turned toward me. Karen wasted no time in making her move. "As most of you are aware," she continued, "we've had a situation with a resident who has been flouting HOA rules, fishing in the lake despite clear regulations." I could feel the room shifting, everyone's attention now fully on me. Karen had framed this as if I were some kind of villain, painting me as the one disrupting the peace. She turned back to the group, her tone growing more forceful. "Therefore, we're implementing new community guidelines. Effective immediately, all activities near the lake must be approved by the HOA. This includes fishing, boating, and any form of recreation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was about controlling every single aspect of life in the neighborhood. She had used her position to create a new set of rules that seemed designed specifically to target me, all while she acted like she was doing everyone a favor. And the worst part? No one in the room said a word. I tried to speak up, to explain that I was being unfairly targeted, but Karen quickly cut me off, her voice firm and unyielding. "This is for the good of the community. We need to protect the interests of everyone here. It was clear now. This wasn't about fishing. This was about power, and Karen wasn't going to stop until she had complete control over every resident. I knew then that the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. But little did I know, Karen was about to make a huge mistake, one that would come back to haunt her in a way no one saw coming. The letter arrived one Tuesday afternoon, just as I was settling in to relax after a long day. I opened it casually, not expecting much beyond some HOA newsletter about landscaping or another frivolous rule change. But as I read, my blood went cold. Dear resident, it began, its tone cold and clinical. This letter serves as formal notification that the HOA now claims ownership of the lake located behind your property. As of today, all activities within and around the lake are subject to HOA approval. Fishing, boating, and any other recreational activities will incur fines unless permission is explicitly granted by the HOA board. My hands shook as I continued reading. They weren't just telling me to stop fishing, they were asserting ownership of the lake. The land I'd lived on for years, the property that had been passed down through my family, was suddenly under their control. And the kicker? If I even attempted to fish again without their approval, I'd be fined $500 for the first offense, with escalating penalties for repeat violations. I could feel my anger rising, bubbling up from deep inside me. How had this become my life? How had Karen managed to manipulate the entire HOA into backing this power grab? The lake wasn't just mine. It had been a part of my family for generations. The thought of Karen having any say over it, of her turning something so personal into another one of her petty battles for control, made me see red. I stormed into my living room, pacing back and forth as I read and reread the letter. I couldn't believe it. But Karen wasn't just a petty dictator. She was dangerous. This wasn't some trivial nuisance. She had overstepped, and now I had to do something about it. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let her get away with this. I called a lawyer that evening, feeling a knot of determination tighten in my stomach. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how far she was willing to go. She wasn't just targeting me. She was rewriting the rules of the entire neighborhood. As the lawyer started to look into the legality of her claims, I braced myself. This fight was about to get a whole lot uglier. And the worst part? Karen hadn't even realized the mistake she was about to make, one that would change everything. As soon as I hired the lawyer, the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. It began with a simple inquiry into the lake's ownership. But what I uncovered was far more than I could have ever imagined. My lawyer, a no-nonsense type with a reputation for digging deep, called me a week later with a voice that was both calm and loaded with concern. "Something's off," he said. "I've been going through the HOA's financials, and there's a lot more going on here than just a dispute over the lake." I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "There's been some serious mismanagement of funds under Karen's leadership," he continued. "In fact, the HOA has lost over $8.2 million over the years. A substantial chunk of that money has been funneled into questionable projects, ones that seem to conveniently benefit Karen and a few of her friends." My blood ran cold as I processed the information. How had I missed this? Karen had always played the part of the concerned, organized leader, but all along, she had been building a house of cards, using her position to siphon funds for her own gain. I asked him to dig deeper. He uncovered that, under Karen's direction, the HOA had inflated property values to drive up membership fees, making them appear more successful than they were. But that was just the beginning. There were reports of kickbacks from contractors, deals that benefited Karen personally, and all the while, she manipulated the community into believing that it was for the greater good. Every time she had imposed new rules or fines, it was to cover up her tracks. The lake, which she had tried to claim ownership of, was just another part of the scam, another piece of property that Karen was using to control the neighborhood and increase its value, all while lining her own pockets. I couldn't believe it. My peaceful fishing trips had become tangled in a web of greed and deceit. But now I had the ammunition to bring Karen down. The question was, how far would I have to go to expose her? And more importantly, what lengths would she go to in order to protect herself? Karen had made a massive mistake, and I was ready to make her regret it. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I was going to fight back. And when my lawyer sent that letter to Karen, I knew the game had changed. The letter was simple but powerful. It outlined the HOA's financial mismanagement, the fraudulent claims about the lake's ownership, and the illegal fines Karen had imposed. It demanded that the HOA cease all attempts to restrict my use of the lake and threaten legal action if they continued. It was a direct hit, a warning shot aimed straight at Karen's carefully built house of lies. I wasn't naive. I knew she wasn't going to back down without a fight. But I was ready for it. The next few days felt like an endless build-up to something monumental. The tension between Karen and me escalated to new heights, as though the neighborhood itself had split down the middle. People I'd known for years were suddenly avoiding eye contact or whispering behind my back. And Karen? She was livid. It wasn't long before I got the call that the HOA had filed a counterclaim against me. They accused me of damaging community property, trying to interfere with HOA regulations, and even creating a public nuisance by taking the matter to court. Karen was scrambling, throwing out accusations left and right, desperate to deflect attention from her own wrongdoing. But this wasn't going to be as easy as she thought. When the first court date finally arrived, I felt a wave of anticipation mixed with dread. The courtroom was cold, sterile, the kind of place where power dynamics felt tangible in the air. My lawyer stood by me, calm and collected, while Karen and her lawyer sat across from us, their smug smiles barely concealing the desperation in their eyes. I couldn't help but notice how Karen shifted uncomfortably when the judge started asking about the HOA's financials. She had no idea we had already uncovered everything. Her schemes, her manipulations, her financial shoddiness. This was no longer a petty fight over a fishing spot. It was a war for control over the entire neighborhood. The moment Karen took the stand, I could see her trying to spin her story, playing the victim. But it was clear that the more she talked, the more her own lies were exposed. The cracks in her armor were starting to show, and I could feel it. Karen's grip on everything she had worked so hard to control was starting to slip. But she wasn't going to give up without a fight. And as I watched her struggle to cover her tracks, I knew things were only going to get uglier from here. The battle for this neighborhood was far from over. The day of reckoning came during the HOA annual meeting, a day that would change the course of everything. The tension in the room was suffocating. Residents filled the seats, murmuring under their breath, their eyes flicking nervously between Karen and me. The usual HOA meetings had always been full of petty complaints, minor rule changes, and occasional disagreements. But today, it felt different, charged, like everyone knew something big was about to happen. I stood at the front, the weight of the legal documents in my hand heavy with significance. My lawyer was by my side, his calm demeanor reassuring despite the storm brewing in the room. Karen sat at the head of the table, looking perfectly composed as always, but there was something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. Fear. She was about to lose everything. I think it's time we address the elephant in the room, I said, my voice steady but my pulse pounding in my ears. The room fell silent. I could feel Karen's glare burning into me, but I didn't flinch. We all know that this whole mess started over a simple issue, my right to fish in the lake. But what you don't know is how far Karen has taken this. How far she's gone to line her own pockets at the expense of this community. I watched as Karen's face tightened, her fingers gripping the edges of the table as if it were the only thing holding her back from lashing out. With a gesture from my lawyer, I passed out copies of the financial records that detailed how Karen had mismanaged over $8 million in HOA funds. The documents laid bare the truth about inflated property values, shady contractor deals, and kickbacks that had been going on under her watch. The room erupted into whispers, some people gasping, others shaking their heads in disbelief. For the first time, I saw the board members begin to exchange nervous glances, their support for Karen wavering. "Karen," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "You can try to deny it all you want, but the truth is here. You've been using the HOA as your personal piggy bank, and it's time everyone knew." Her face turned a deep shade of red. "This is slander," she shouted, rising from her chair, her voice cracking with emotion. "This isn't how it's supposed to go. I've done nothing wrong." But the room was no longer on her side. The neighbors, who had once rallied around her, now watched in silence, their judgment clear in their eyes. The board members were looking at her like she was a stranger, someone they no longer recognized. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Karen refused to back down. She was a cornered animal, desperate to hold on to her power. Her denial filled the room with a tension I could almost taste, But there was no escaping the truth. The battle wasn't over, though. Karen might have been exposed, but I had a feeling she wasn't done fighting. And the worst part? She had no idea just how much more was coming her way. As the meeting continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had something left in her arsenal, something that would make this fight even more dangerous. The moment the board decided to remove Karen, I couldn't help but feel a rush of relief and a sense of justice. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything Karen had stolen, every inch of power she had abused, every lie she had spun. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was breathing again, free from her suffocating grip on the neighborhood. The meeting had barely wrapped up when the board's decision was made official. Karen, who had been so sure of her power, was now standing there, a silent figure of defeat. The board members, who had once looked to her for direction, now turned away, some looking at the floor, others avoiding her gaze entirely. It was over. I could see the shift in the room. The residents, those who had once feared Karen's wrath or simply tolerated her petty rules, were now speaking out, asking questions, demanding transparency. The financial mismanagement Karen had hidden for so long was finally laid bare for everyone to see. The HOA's books, now open for scrutiny, told a story of deceit, inflated fees, stolen funds, and shady deals. The damage Karen had done over the years was impossible to ignore. The neighborhood, once divided and wary, began to rally together. People started sharing their frustrations, their doubts, and their hopes for a fresh start. It was clear that they were ready to rebuild, to put their trust in a new leadership that wouldn't play politics with their homes and lives. And then, the best part, the lake was mine again. My right to fish there, to enjoy the peaceful waters without fear of petty fines or invasive rules, was officially reinstated. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but to me, it felt like everything. That lake wasn't just a body of water. It was a symbol of my life, my peace, and my home. As I walked away from the meeting, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of closure. The storm had passed. The chaos, the confrontation, the endless drama, it was all behind me. But something told me that, despite this victory, the wounds left by Karen's reign wouldn't be healed so easily. The real work was just beginning. And as I watched the neighborhood start to rebuild itself, I knew it was only a matter of time before the next battle began. One that would challenge everything we thought we knew about trust, power, and justice. As I cast my line into the lake that afternoon, I couldn't help but smile, because the one thing Karen never counted on was karma. The water rippled gently as I settled into my usual spot, the quiet hum of nature filling the air. It felt right, like everything was finally back where it belonged. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was at peace. Karen, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. New leadership was voted in, people with actual integrity, people who wanted to rebuild the community instead of control it. The moral of the story? Don't let anyone take away your peace, and always fight for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Karma has a way of sorting things out, even if it takes time. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Confessions of HOA for more dramatic, real-life stories about neighborhood drama and the petty power struggles that go on behind closed doors. Until next time, keep standing up for yourself and your rights.